My mother's mother was named Ida Baker. She was married to John Ed Baker. John Ed Baker was the son of Ben Baker, who was commonly referred to in the family as Pap Ben, Pap for dad or granddad. According to my grandmother, Ben Baker was freed from being enslaved. Ben Baker was mulatto in color. I'll have a picture of him, straight hair and kind of greenish eyes. One of Ben's constant statements was that his master did not beat him, he was good to him, he educated him, and when he was freed, Ben became the postman for the neighborhood. Later on, began to preach for a while. After he stopped preaching, he donated his church as the elementary school in Gracie. And that elementary school, my grandfather, John Ed Bacon, taught at.
Is there any indication that the slave owner was perhaps his father?
The rumor in the family was, and they said that anytime you confronted my great-grandfather, Pat Ben, with that, it infuriated him, and he denied it, and he did not want to believe that was true. But the word in the family, they really believe he didn't get the real bad treatment that many enslaved people did because it was his father.
And I think that was a common practice.
Yeah, common practice.
Yeah.
That also accounted for the fact that he was literate. He taught him to read before he was freed. And he consequently, knowing how to read, taught my grandfather how to read. My grandfather, John Ed Baker, was secretary of the church and had an extremely beautiful handwriting. Because more than 50% of the population in the area, African Americans, were illiterate, he was the corresponding secretary for the neighborhood. When they got letters from their relatives who were up north in other cities, they brought them to John Ed, my grandfather. He would read the letter to them, and then he'd have a notepad. They would dictate a letter to their relatives. He would write it for a small fee. Many times they said for a half pint of whiskey. He was a great lover of whiskey. But he knew everybody's business because he read everybody's mail, and they dictated letters to their relatives for him. So he was really considered a high-profile guy for the neighborhood. He hated hard work. He started out as a sharecropper, I understand. He hated it so bad, he and his brother went in the barbecue business, and they barbecued pigs and sheep for a living. John Ed had one brother that I knew and I met. I have a picture of him. His name was Uncle Pat. Patrick was his name. And Patrick had a barbecue business in Gracie. He was self-employed. He had built his own home, and he was known as the businessman of the neighborhood. It was said, I never could confirm it. They said he was illiterate, unlike his brother who went to school. He didn't go to school, but they said he was a math genius. Said selling his barbecue dinners, he could figure out what the price of 20 of them was faster than most people could figure out what the price was too. And he made his living doing this. He lived fairly middle class and was a great uncle of mine. That was the only relative that I knew that my grandfather had. The only quote that I remember that my grandmother told me often that my grandfather, John Ed Baker, said was, when I was very small, it took me, when I was a baby, it took me a long time to walk or crawl. They said at 18 months they were a little worried that I may have been intellectually challenged, that I didn't do anything but sit in my baby chair. My mother went to him. He was considered the brightest man in the family, and says, I'm worried about Cuttie. He sits in the chair. He doesn't get up and crawl and play like most kids do at his age. He informed my mother when I was 18 months old there was absolutely nothing wrong with me other than I was a bit lazy. And he informed her also to make sure that she insisted on me going to school and get a good education, because I was the kind of guy that would never like hard work. Spending 4 or 5 summers with my 2 grandparents was probably the highlight of my childhood. Being in a family with 7 brothers and sisters, going to the country for the summer, spending it with my 2 grandparents, was like becoming an only child. My grandmother, Ida Baker, my mother's mother, had adopted her granddaughter from my mother's sister who was deceased. And by the way, my mother had 3 sisters, Mary Lee, Chatterby, and I don't remember the other one's name. But I had this first cousin, Tinny B, we called her, and I had a playmate to play with at my grandmother's house. And although my grandmother and my 2 grandmothers lived 5 doors apart, my mother's mother, Ida Baker, turned out to be kind of the favorite grandmother. She was a favorite grandmother because she didn't discipline much. She was the most loving woman I ever met, and she taught you and had a lot of patience. Had a personality just the opposite of my paternal grandmother. She didn't demand a lot, she didn't discipline a lot, and she didn't talk a lot. The fun of being around her was she taught me things, life lessons. The first lesson she taught me was how to, at about 10 years old, how to kill a chicken. And she raised her own chickens and had a hen house where they hatched the eggs. So it was my first experience of her saying, "Oh, we're going to have omelets for breakfast. Go to the hen house and bring me 6 eggs." You simply go to the hen house, look in the nest, and pick out 6 eggs, bring them in, and we had fresh eggs. When she got ready for it, she had about 50 chickens. When the chickens were large enough, she called them frying size, which was about 2 pounds. She showed me how to put corn down. The chicken would come up and start pecking. You simply grab the chicken by his neck, and you heard the old term, wring his neck. You simply wring his neck off, put a bucket over him so he wouldn't jump around and get blood all over the grass, because when you first wring a chicken's neck off, he jumps around until he dies. After that, you stick him in a pot of hot water and open up his pores, pull all the feathers out, put him in a box to be used later, slit him down the center, take his intestines out, bury them because she didn't have garbage disposal, take his insides out, wash him out, cut the chicken in 8 pieces, wash it good, bread it up, just put it in deep frying grease, and you got country fried chicken. I learned how to do that at 10 years old, and to this day, I can still use that same method to fry chicken, from a live chicken to a piece of meat on the table. My experience.
What did they use the feathers for?
They use feathers for making pillows and mattresses. You actually, if you, over a span of 6 months, they had some kind of way of washing them, and they would stuff them in a container, like a homemade sheet case, and then they put a pillowcase over that, and you got feather pillowcase. And they also made comforts the same way. So they threw away, in the country, they almost threw away nothing, and they had no regular public garbage disposal. So any garbage like the intestinal chicken, you had to take it in the far back, about 25 yards from the house, in a background yard. You dig a hole and bury them so animals wouldn't get to them. Also, intestinals of things like chickens and ducks fertilize the soil real good, and it grows great earthworms. And every time you go fishing, when it rains, you go back and dig up earthworms, grow from that sewage, and make great bait for fishing. The one thing I learned in the rural areas, you throw away absolutely nothing. Everything is preserved. I remember even my job was to take 10 cans that canned goods came in and take a hammer and flatten them, and she'd have some use for them someplace for something. But everything was preserved and used and reused.